Hello. So I'm Sophia-Layla, and I just wanted to take a moment before I talk about my work to acknowledge that we're all here in this space. It's quite easy for us to get disembodied when we're talking about ideas, when we're talking about art, and I think it's really nice that we're sort of in contact with the ground, trying to have a little bit of a sense of where our bodies are in space and time. That's a particularly important thing both for my art and also how I generally live, because over the many years of being a lawyer, I learned how to shut out anything but my cognition. And the only emotions that I was really allowed, or I allowed myself to feel, were anger and frustration. So I just wanted to have a moment to touch on that. And that's also a really important theme in my work. In terms of how I found myself here today, it was actually a very zigzaggy journey. Because as a kid, I used to look at art, I used to be really fascinated, but I'm dyspraxic, which means that my motor coordination is really poor. And I was sort of stuck in that old mentality that you need to make pretty things. And I thought, oh no, this is not for me. But it's over the years of sort of going to a lot of galleries, getting a sense of what art looks like, that can be more conceptual, that can be more in which you can use assistance, that I started getting more comfortable with the idea of ideas, playing with things that aren't necessarily pretty. And in terms of the my immediate entry point into the residency, it has been through the medium of activism. So I came out about 2 years ago as a trans woman, and the loss of privilege of passing as a male was incredibly stark. Going from a cishet man to a queer woman was not an easy journey. And I went through the process of learning more about myself, learning more, having a new relationship with society. Over time, there was an anger that was latent that started growing because the loss of privilege was so stark that it was really hard for me to ignore. So I used various mediums. I've been working with platforms like the Aurat March. I've been organizing 1 year, and then the Non-Binary Collective. I was sort of helped found that, and then a bunch of other things. I'm also a therapist. I retrained in that a few years ago, but there was still something missing for me. It still felt far too individualized, and I wanted to make that a much more of a broader conversation. So I was looking for something to do. I quit the corporate world just a few months earlier, and I was very fortunate to be invited to apply to this. And when Fizal Khatri actually approached me and said that we'd love for you to apply, just want to see what you've been up to, I was actually very skeptical. I was like, I can't work with my hands. I've written a few things, but that's about it. And then I thought about a few things. I was like, okay, let me do what I'm good at. I attached some of my speeches and wrote a few things. And then in my application, I said, I want to work with the physical medium because I want to give people an immersive experience. As a therapist, it's always been very important for me to have a conversation. And it's always a conversation that is immediate and in real time. So I don't want to be having conversations by proxy in terms of putting something there and then people are engaging with it without me being present. Because I think my presence there speaks to the art in a way that my absence doesn't. So one of the things that I decided very early on in the residency was that I didn't want to treat this as sculpture or installation, I wanted to treat them as props. So these are props for conversation. Right? So people will turn up, they'll look at something, and they would have whatever feelings, whatever thoughts they have. And that would be the jumping off point for how they interact with me. And that was something that, situation artists existed for decades. But in terms of how I do it, in terms of my activism, again, there's people who've done this before me as well, but because I have no formal training, it was completely new to me. I discovered it later that, of course, other people have done it before me. Very few ideas original. And what was particularly exciting was once we had a space in which there was a sense of safety and a sense of allowing mistakes to happen, but not just allowing mistakes to happen, but also celebrate the process. Then there was a sense of play that opened up for me. I very much saw myself as a sort of burnt out, grumpy lawyer all those months ago, and I even bought a book that taught me how to play as an adult, and of course that didn't work. So it's only something like this that created a sense of safety that I started doing that. So I started doing silly things like rolling around in the gallery and throwing things at wires, those wires at the top, and put some stuff over there. And I've been posting all these interesting, theoretical things that I've been discovering because I am new to the world of art. I don't have any formal training in it. And a few people have been responding here and there. And then it's only when I started doing things like throwing things at wires that people started messaging me saying this is fun. And these are established artists, which made me really think that how much play is missing in both the art world, but generally in activism and in other spaces. It is seen as a very serious intellectual endeavor a lot of the times, and I think that's really unfortunate because people are only really receptive toward new ideas and new things and new ways of looking at things when they're not defensive. And if it's a contest of ideas, if it's a contest of worldviews, people are already on the cover, right? And through the process of making this art and having the conversations with the props, I learned very quickly that when I added humor, it did disarm me. So what was particularly interesting for me is when I added humor, I didn't have to censor or tone down the really difficult things I was saying in terms of my activism. But I had the benefit of allowing people to engage with deep things while still also having that sense of play. And it's really hard to mediate that without being physically present. Because people will come in and they'd be very confused, like, should I laugh at this? I mean, should I not? It's a slur, but she's using it. What should I do? How do I relate with this? There's all these googly eyes on the floor. What do they represent? And I always went with the sense of, okay, and this is my therapist talking. It's like, okay, so what is it for you? What's the theme coming up for you? And then that's a jumping off point for me. For some people, it's, oh, that's really sinister. It's staring at me, and there's a sense of the gaze, which is also a theme I play with. I play a lot with the neurotypical gaze. I play a lot with the cisgender gaze. And so that's the direction I would take that little situation. But in some cases, it would be much more playful. It'd be like, no, it's kind of silly. I mean, there's all these eyes. I'm tripping over them. I don't know what to do. Should I fix it? Should I not fix it? Sometimes I would pretend to be angry at people ruining the art. I'd be like, oh my God, you ruined it. Now fix it. And they would actually go back and then I have to calm down. And that's a really important moment for me to demonstrate how I am actually taking care of the audience. Right? So a lot of the time, these would be people who would have some sort of privilege over me, and I am offering emotional care. And as a result, there is that element of, someone who is more marginalized, although I have situational privilege because this is a space that I've helped create. But in terms of absolute identities, perhaps not. So I'm offering them that care while being a little playful. Giving people an opportunity to experience that little tiny jolt, and then being taken into a safe safer space. I really don't like safe space because it's a term that's really abused generally. And the other theme that really came up in my work is one of the things after coming out that I experience all the time is questions about my body. They're incredibly common. It's just like, it's almost like a formula. It's like, I'm trans. Oh, okay, good for you. Can I ask you a personal question? It's that thing, right? So it's always some sort of question about, hormones or surgeries or, dysphoria or anything like that. And of course, that's not a question you would ask a cis person. These are questions that cis people feel entitled to knowing the answer from trans people because our bodies are considered as an object of spectacle, right? So one of the themes I wanted to play with was to evoke that curiosity, but not give them the payoff. So a lot of the work that I've done, a lot of the props I use, do allude to that information being present somewhere in the gallery, but I don't actually provide that information, right? And there's just little ways I do it. Sometimes it's more playful, sometimes it's more an attempt at evoking frustration, and particularly when there is frustration that I'm trying to evoke, I'm there to take care of it. Right? So that person's getting really frustrated, it's like, and then I'm like, okay, let's take a moment. Let's see why you're frustrated. Why do you want to know this? What is the sense of, where is this curiosity coming from? Right? And then very slowly taking them in the direction of, this is really personal, right? And I would really want you to explore the biases, but not actually expressly saying that. There's that subtext of undertones of, just, giving people that little jolt, but then taking them back into safety. So, it's a very delicate balance. That's really difficult. Maybe other people have figured out how to do it, but I haven't figured out how to do it without being physically present in the gallery. And that's why I keep telling everyone that this is not sculpture, this is not installation. It looks like sculpture and installation. They look like separate pieces. There are 14 of them. They all have labels, they all have names. But they're not really, because the whole point of them isn't for the aesthetic or the presence itself. In fact, in many ways, if I'm able to facilitate a conversation without them being there, it's just as fruitful for me in terms of art than their physical presence, right? The only thing is, it is harder to do humor without a physical gag of some sort. So yeah, that's where I am. And in terms of future, I have no idea what I'm going to be doing in 2 weeks' time. This residency over the last 4 months has been such a healing space for me because I have a full-time job. I also have my own private practice as a therapist, which I do on top of my full-time job. And the only thing I usually look forward to until about 5 or 6 in the evening is to come to the gallery. Right? This is my space to play, and I'm often here alone.
You come a lot, right?
Yeah, I do come a lot. I'm usually the last person to leave because it is such a space. The way the curators have really curated this space, and it's not just the physical presence of everything else. It's the relationships that have been created that are in which there's a sense of flattening hierarchy. There have been instances in which someone has really taken up a lot of space, and then there's been pushback, and there has been that element of rupture and repair. There are people saying, okay, you are taking up a lot of space. There's these voices that are sort of being drowned out by that, and there's a conversation, and then there's a readjustment, retuning, new equilibrium, and then there's another rupture in the future. And that sense of rupture and repair is such an important part of queer feminist practice of flattening hierarchy and democratizing the space that I'm really thankful. And I think I would give credit to the curators and to Aziz that they've given us that opportunity to do that, to a lot of the time hold them accountable and say, look, we understand your vision, we understand your experience, but I really feel strongly about this, you know, and having that conversation. So I think that's it for me.
Pause. Well, we can always talk about things and also talk about the future and other things. Sure.
Are we handing over to you?
Yes, we can hand over. I also just want to get a sense check from everyone. I just want to say there's chai and coffee. There's not coffee, sorry. There is chai and there's water and there is food, that just like snacks. People are welcome to, like there is no problem if you just want to go and grab it while this is happening. I totally feel like people obviously need nourishment and sustenance. I will actually go get it while Terry starts speaking. But Terry, you can also just begin whenever you're ready and welcome people.
I just want to ask, can you check your Insta live for Awaz and right?
Awaz nahi aa rahi thi.
Sahi aa rahi thi. I'm sure I
Let's check the minutes.
Let's be honest.
आपकी आ रही है. चलें? शुरू करें? चलें.
Hi everyone. Hi. That's my best friend.
Great way to start.
You are all my best friends. My name is Tareem and I'm not from Karachi, I'm from Lahore, so I moved for this residency. Hania and Mariam are also from Lahore. That stuff. And so like I think Layla was saying that she's the last person to leave this gallery, and in the past few months I never came to this gallery to make work. So I was inhabiting the city because that's something that became art for me. And so I think there's some things that will be in juxtaposition because Layla talks about becoming an artist like recently and like wanting to go into art. And I grew up like painting since grade 6. I was just doing oil paintings, and then I went to college and I studied studio art and political science. And then I came out of college 2 years ago and I didn't paint for a very long time. So in college I would be in the studio all the time, and it would be like as much as Alize's space here. And Mariam, who was at college with me, was like, I would not want to go to the studio, but I would have to paint. So I would be like, can you just walk with me in the studio, which is 10 minutes? And that was a whole journey. So even this gallery, like I didn't really use it because I guess I don't like to be in that space, or just like painting became like a place of you have to make work so that you know. So there's an end product in mind, which is where we lost the fun. So Layla, the thing that Layla said about fun was really important because I think I also discovered that through this residency. So I'll tell you how. I'll just like go over 2-3 points, and then those will be entry points for you all to sort of engage. So I'm talking about 3 things. The first one will just be like in general what my work has been about. So if anybody hasn't been introduced to it, there are prints over there if you want to see. Those are images of like my work and then the ways in which I've layered the images I've taken in Karachi. And then there were 2 videos. One was called How to Be a Graceful Loser, and the other one was called Do You Think Loving America is Cool? Both of which are about me. So those were there. So the first one, or like in general, the theme that I'm going to talk about is like grief, and that was a question we got on the Insta as well. So I lost my father 4 years ago in college, in my first year of college, and then a year later I lost an uncle. A year later I lost a 30-year-old cousin to suicide, and then a year later when I came home to Pakistan, there was this family from the village who was living with us for treatment, and their 12-year-old son was living with us, and we would make videos and have lots of fun together. He also passed away this January. So in a way I feel like, you know, I'm the queen of morbid jokes and stuff, but I do think like grief is under my belt. And like I think I can speak on grief, or like I think that it has become something that I've been inhabiting for a very long time. So I guess like this time we were talking with Umar Wasim when he came for our studio visit, who is an artist as well, and he was talking about how these images, or in general, like my work, shows how I have been sort of thinking about the multiplicity of time and how grief is never in the past, right? So we're always, I think like for me, especially with these images, with my father's diary coming in, my own diary coming in, and this is my diary that I wrote like last year during COVID. So all the time in my work, I think I'm revisiting the documentation I took like a year or 2 ago, and then coming back with how does it go with images, or how does it go with my life right now. So I thought that was a really cool way that he talked about that. And the second thing is also about how he was talking about how grief is also spatial. So the ways in which I've been visiting graveyards or shrines in Karachi has been like spatially like entering into spaces where you are meant to feel grief. I don't really feel very aggrieved in graveyards. I don't feel a lot of like, I don't even know if I feel a lot of stuff in shrines and stuff. But I do think about like how you are basically sinking in and out of that grief that this environment has created for you, or that humans or in general like the sacred people have created for us, right? So I think in that ways I was discovering like grief in a way in which I could like be around it. And this is again why I don't like studios. The second thing I do want to talk about is in general this residency has been a lot about queer and feminist practices. And so the word opacity has been thrown around a lot. Like I didn't know what it meant at first. I still don't know. Like Fizza would always
So what do you think it means?
I don't know. I'll tell you. But like Fizza would always be like, Daddy, just you could play with opacity.
I don't know what the scene.
Omar Wasim was like, Daddy, you don't have to show your video. You can play with opacity. Like, veil it. And like he's like, grief is also veiled, right? And this is where my entry point is in that way. So I read this book called Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. And she is this, I think, Caribbean author. And it's about like somebody, there are two girls who like, there's a plane that crashed on the same day that 9/11 happened. But that was not documented because, people are better. So it didn't, and also didn't happen because of terrorism or anything. Anyway, so in the book, these two sisters, they discover that they're sisters because their father passes away. And in that, she talks about grief really well. If anybody wants to ever read it, really is perfect. But she talks about how I don't know how to say to the grief counseling people that I'm a very graceful loser. And in general, have you ever thought about how loss and grief has to be so palatable for people? We think about Layla's art as well, and how sometimes Layla's art puts people in a place where they're uncomfortable, or they're taking too much space, or they don't like it if it's not palatable. I don't like your misery if it's not something that I can consume. And that happens a lot to all of us, right? And that happens a lot in general with grief as well. In front of professors, I would have to be oh, sorry about your father. It's okay, thanks. It has to be so polite all the time. And I ran a grief support group for 6 months prior to this residency and also into this residency. So we talked a lot about losing siblings, or losing a parent, or losing a significant other, even in a breakup. And so I was just thinking about how in that way there is so much opacity in grief, if that makes sense, so you have to really be opaque about it. You can't always let it come to the forefront. Tears will well up in your eyes randomly, but you cannot explain to everybody the context and stuff like that. So that opacity also comes in my videos. If you see them, you won't understand everything. You won't understand every context or anything. And so that opacity is my decision to say, I'm never, even in the ways in which I operate in general with my grief, it's never been something that people have been able to hold. I've had to hold it with loved ones who do understand it. And so I do not have to hold you either. Which, yeah. Okay. The third thing I do want to talk about is, so everybody was talking about experimentation and talking about these images, and these are not paintings, they're this is so odd that nobody would put it in a gallery. We'll see about that. But I think so. When I was in college, I was inhabiting a lot of academic texts. So I was reading Rashid Arain, who is a really incredible Pakistani artist, and he writes this book called Making Myself Visible. And it's all about how the art world is also very focused on white voices, and it's very focused on the ways in which internationalism and universality has been created for us has been very you place them at the center and then we're all on the periphery. And so I was trying to inhabit the world in college, right? So I was okay, I see all this academic text, I see all this post-colonialism and all that. I'm going to try to make art out of that, which was very difficult to do. And so this residency, I have not been reading at all. I've been just sort of inhabiting the image. instead. And so Leonard Shlain, I don't know much about this, but my friend's sister told me. So Leonard Shlain talks about the image versus the word, and he also talks about the goddess versus the word. So when religion started to write, like Ikra, that's when religions also started becoming more patriarchal. So religions that are based on the image of the goddess are more matriarchal, and they inhabit sort of like ecology and the woman in a way. So the moment you start reading something, you are taking it in a very linear way. While when you see an image, you take it in a very holistic way, right? And so when we brought in that word and this academia and all this bullshit, right? Like, then we lost that. Then we lost that sort of holisticness and we went to very linear forms of thinking, and that is not going to empower me as a painter or as an artist. So I tried to do that in college and it didn't empower me. People could not inhabit my language, right? And this time I was like, okay, I'll just make bad art, and then I was like, yo, I'm free. That's, I think, like where I've been going at with this. And so I think those are just like a bunch of things I've been thinking about. And also the last thing, that when you have the image, it's also more like, it's more in sync with ecology as well. So you will see, like maybe matriarchal societies and that stuff is also very inclined with the environment that they're around, and they want to create fear and community. It's also part of the strategy. So thank you.
Cool. I just want to say that we actually put up like an Insta, well, it is Insta Live, so hi to everyone there, but also we actually asked people to like say questions if they wanted. I don't know who Lord Kester is on Instagram, but they said no questions, just praise, love what you all are doing. So this is coming. And I know you guys already addressed this, but I think this was a great question that Sadia Khatri asked. How has your own relationship with grief changed through making art? I feel like both of you already tried to address that already in different ways. And already Afsar, who's here, asked also a really good question that I know we discussed and actually just already want to bring it up to you guys. Is how do you come, or why, or both, I guess, how and why, did you come to realize that you wanted to make art? And I think specifically for you, I know you kind of addressed it a bit in your talk, but I feel like maybe a bit more, maybe especially for you. Yeah.
Or do we want to ask people to ask questions and then we can sort of...
Well, I already took one from the audience.
Oh.
Who's there?
Oh, okay.
Let's answer that one.
And then we'll go into, yes.
I just wanted to have fun. I wanted to create art because there were things there that felt like they needed to be there, and the process of putting it from there to there transformed it, and I added a few things. Like literally one of the things, they call it environmental dependency syndrome or something, which is apparently people with ADHD have frontal lobe lesions. I have ADHD. So one of the things that apparently we do is when I see this, I don't really see a cup I drink from, I see a hat. or I see a little thing to joust with, right? Or I see, let me tear it if I can. Right, I see a little disc. If I can throw the frisbee. Right, that's just how my brain works. So, and apparently if you read all the scientific journals, it's pathologized because, apparently my brain is less than others. But I realized that a lot of this was something that was interpreted as play by neurotypical people. And it was sort of beaten out of me because when I would do that in school, it was considered disruptive, right? But what's really interesting is if you take that into a context of a gallery, it's something that's really celebrated. Although what's really interesting is, initially I was so terrified of doing this that
You mean initially when you started the residency?
when I started the residency, that I didn't want to do that because of all the historical associations I had. But then I did a little bit, and people responded positively. That encouraged me to do more of it, and then more of it, and more of it. And now I can just do that on the fly, right? And you can make an armband out of this. just little things like that. So for me, creating art is a sense of, using play. And then of course I can add metaphors that throw in my sense factors and just put little hearts on it. And I can play with the idea of, broken hearts, or I can play with the idea of, whatever metaphor you want to play with. So that blends sort of the sense of queerness and transness for me, and also the sense of neurodivergence for me. It's the two themes sort of run hand in hand. So one of the joys of this residency is it has really felt like work. This one I can make a little crown for myself, and whatever it is. And apparently, when neurotypical people see that, they think I'm some sort of creative genius. But it's just how my brain fucking works, and that's it. And what's really great about it is when you have a space in which there's a sense of safety to experiment like that, then those minority voices like mine, those minority brains, have a space to actually present their authentic selves and be celebrated. I honestly don't think I am incredibly creative. I just have ADHD and dyspraxia and autism and all those bunch of things. I've been diagnosed with a whole rainbow of things. And it's only because I have the privilege of being in the space and, having been to a university, a particular university, going to a certain type of museum, seeing Damien Hirst's art at the age of 18 and being wowed by it, and then going to Tracy Emin's exhibition and just sort of incorporating those ideas and letting them sort of mull in my head for years and years and years, and then having a chat with you lovely folks and doing that. So that's how I found myself.
I actually also want to ask this question to Tahreem that was asked to me. Just because I know Tahreem, you had a much more, and we've talked about also this during the residency in some way also and I would put myself in the same boat. I mean, having gone through a college and studied art history, and you went to a college and also studied art.
Or to the college.
The college. And a lot of us, and we're also in a university where also people really study art, right? And I think there's a lot of people here who are in the process of either getting their degree or might have recently graduated in also this field. And so your answer, of course, is not you were 18, right?
Yeah.
And doing art, right? I guess just thinking with you about this question, that also, and the way Sophia-Layla addressed it as well, perhaps.
I think one thing that Layla was saying was how certain things you see this as a disc or something like this, and I was maybe that's it. You're divergent. I'm kidding. No, but I know you can't diagnose yourself. So I was just thinking about how, in general, that has been the vibe for me as well. But I think that the wish to do well in school or to insert yourself into that academic way of doing things, and then to insert yourself into I want to be the best, is what gets into the people who go to art school or who go there. And then your worth is based on you being whatever kind of skill that you have, right? And so I think that does mess with how you work as well. And so I don't think it's very helpful. And I also think that the concept of play is missed out in those schools.
And you're super play.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I am. See, nobody will let me talk like this in college.
And it's celebrated in a space, which
yeah,
is great.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back and see if there are other questions, but feel free for folks to jump in and ask questions now as well. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, one point. It's not, it is a question, I think so, that you said you're not creative but you're divergent. Do you want to talk more about that? Because maybe that's also one thing that makes us creative, right?
Yeah, I think what's this whole narrative or this whole binary of creative, not creative, is a very typical. It's a very neurotypical one, right? So in the mind of a neurotypical person, this is seen as creativity. But when I hang out with other neurodivergent folks, it is just a way of being.
Mm-hmm.
You know, So in that sense, it is not seen as something that is exceptional, right? And creativity is often seen as something that's exceptional. And there is sort of that, sinister undertone that, because I am, according to neurotypical standards, seen as creative, I am that spectacle, right? However, when I'm hanging out with other neurotypical folks, that element of spectacle isn't there, because that is just the way it is, right? And one of the things that I've tried to capture in my work is to provide that element of play while trying to tone back the spectacle. Right? It is not easy. It's definitely not easy, and it again requires me to be present in the gallery and have these conversations, because people will see things like something that is kind of unusual or dramatic, and then I have to be present to sort of recontextualize that a little bit playfully and having conversations and things like that. And I haven't quite figured out a way to do that without being present in the space. And maybe one day I will, but that's where I am right now.
I also wanted to I was just going through the questions that I'd emailed you guys, and I just thought this was a good, and just to kind of bring everyone in, so I emailed them just a bunch of questions, which some of them kind of addressed. So the first question was about thinking of your practice during the summer. How has slow thinking and experimenting helped you think through and support? I feel like you kind of all brought that up, but we can obviously talk about it more. I also asked them about play and performance in their works, and also thinking of it through care and conversation. And I maybe wanted to kind of just because both of you have talked about play, but you've kind of mentioned the word care, right? But I feel like both of you haven't talked about care as much as you talked about play. And I do wonder if you can kind of maybe think about that a little bit as well. Because we've also talked about this in this residency, right? Like what is care? And this is just me, I'm just going to say this as a curator who's in the world where I feel like everyone wants to talk about care during this pandemic over the last 18 months, but 90% of those people haven't been able to really do care properly. And this kind of goes on all levels, right? So the government saying let's all care for each other, and then or the global north saying we should all care and we're all one people, but then the global north, hoards vaccines when the global south, just die. Yeah. Or even in I don't know, I was getting my degree while I was in, during the last year, my last year of my degree, my grad degree was during the pandemic, and every email was I hope you're doing well in these urgent times, or taking care of yourself, or we want to be I'm just saying and I guess that was important as well performatively, but it didn't do much. So I guess what I just want to ask you guys is maybe think of that as well, this a little bit more, and maybe bring that up, because I know both of you are really interested in that.
I think we can both talk about it, but it's cool because this we talk about in our residency, we talk about how important they can do care like us, we're just competitively wanting to care. But there were times, when there was, I guess, the need to focus on care rather than other things, for example, what kind of example?
Well, how would you define care? What is care? How do you define it?
I think it's based on community or I'm just trying to think.
I have some ideas for that.
You guys can also switch between each other.
Yeah.
Okay. I can give you a little spiel, because I do come from mental health, so I can talk about care all day long. Yeah, I am the expert. So, for me, I think my jumping off point, and this is where I think most even mental health professionals fail, is that care is communal. Care isn't individualized. So a lot of the times, particularly when we're talking about minority stress, cripples, even cis women, it is individual. Problems are individualized. So, there's something you are experiencing trauma. It is your job to be more resilient. No.
Or going to therapy.
Or going into therapy alone and build a thicker skin. No. this is the trauma of being a minority or having less privilege, being marginalized. First, we need to acknowledge that this is wrong. Second, we need to say that it is not your job to heal from trauma that is imposed on you and not internal. Right? It can be internalized, of course, over time. And this is something that informs my work a lot. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to sort of go into activism and now art, is because I was getting really frustrated with the whole one-on-one process, where I was working with these people who I didn't really see an out for. Right? Okay, you might be trans, and the world is really transphobic. And I can acknowledge that it's transphobic. But you're not really going to heal from the trauma by developing thicker skin. Right? I need to go out and change the world. And I think as a mental health professional, I would be failing if I didn't do that. And I do think that is a part of my job. Right? And that's one of the reasons why me doing sort of feminist activism, trans activism, doing, making sort of more socially informed art, putting out information videos as a therapist, they all sort of interlink, because they're all trying to change, they're all trying to sort of dissolve hierarchies, and provide people who are marginalized with a better society that is less traumatized. I think it really is very much that. And coming back to the residency in terms of care, I think that was done on a smaller scale. It was an element of, okay, I do realize that there are, both inherent hierarchies in terms of, as he's a cis man, I'm a trans woman, there is a hierarchy here, intrinsically.
I don't live here, I live here.
You don't live here, I live here. But there's also like a more functional hierarchy in the sense that Aziz is a curator, and I am lowly artist, and there is a conversation to be had about both of those, right? Saying that, sometimes I would tell Aziz, like, Aziz, take a step back. I think you're taking up a lot of space. I'm really struggling to express myself. And sometimes Aziz would take that, a lot of times Aziz would take that. Aziz would listen. Yeah, actually, okay, let's have that conversation. And of course, that's really uncomfortable for both of us. It's not something that's easy to hear. But the fact that, and I'm just pointing to you because you're sitting right next to me, it's not a conversation I had just with Aziz. These are conversations I was also on the receiving end of sometimes. And the fact that these conversations were not only seen as points of rupture, but encouraged, is a really important part of it. Because it is a way of curating and creating and co-nurturing in a way that is entirely different from how it's done outside. And I think that's what carries.
I'm going to add just a little bit. And then another thing that is a part of queer and feminist practice that we learned from Shana and Zara was citation, and how that's a very important part of your work, and giving compensation or giving people credit where it's due, especially in Pakistan where most artists are privileged, and then we go into communities and then we are there's also this gaze and documenting. And so in this video that I made of Anas as well, who is of course not in my class or anything, the video began about Anas, and then I was like, no, this is not even about Anas, this is about me. So I think that there was a sense of is this about my grief, or is this about Anas or whatever? So I think there was a point where you have to then ask the people who are in it whether they can be in it, whether, my cousin who was in it, in my video, I had to ask her as well. And these are things that, I'm not used to, because we never talked about this when we were talking about film in college or anything. And so that becomes really important in the global south. And the second thing I think is care for yourself while you're making, or in general doing anything that you want to be good at. And so that became a really important part, because productivity is there's lots of kinds of productivity. There's relational productivity as well. This residency was about relational productivity. I made friends, and that was productive, the host family that I'm staying with, my parents are like, "Beta, you're getting good grades."
Yes, should I give you an A grade at the end?
Yes. And then I was like, I don't know how to tell you I'm really fact. It's like making plans and going to history graveyard. So that became something that I had to like internalize and be okay with in myself, and then be able to say, yes, this is my work, and it's a print or a painting, but it's great. So this is like the cool stuff. And then also I would just like to say, like the rest of the residents, like Aisha and Elise and Sahan and Zadia, I think everybody was like I internalized care, care practice from them, because they would just be like, we can help you because you're not from this city, we can do this for you, we can that stuff. And I'm also just thinking about how Aisha's wearing the sari work is also about like oral traditions of like helping women in your family do the sari thing, and then Elise's thing was playing the Sindhi music, and those are both oral things that you're hearing, right? And again we go back to like oral traditions are more matriarchal, and they're cyclical, and so there is this transfer, like you're transferring knowledge as well. So there's also, I think, even in the open house organizing, we're trying to transfer knowledge, or increase the amount of like benefits that we got from this funding from the guilty whites.
I don't know if that should be sure. Anyways. No, that's fine. Maybe folks want to jump in and ask questions. I have more, and there are also more from online, but I also want to welcome, there's some space here. I want to bring people into the circle, they're in this outer circle. Please come into the inner circle. There's also cushions on that side if folks want to hang out in the corner. Again, invitation to have chai and pani, and I don't know how many samosas are left because that thing goes immediately. And it's like really the best. So, anyone has any questions? Any thoughts? Any questions?
Thoughts or comments or anything?
Thoughts, comments, criticism?
Yeah. I mean, the question, rage. Also, you can kind of make it a comment question or just a comment. I have 3 more, but I'm not gonna ask them immediately. I want to give space to them. Okay. And you just want to introduce yourself? What's your name?
My name is Kushu.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Kushu. My question from you is, I want to know more about the grief process or the grieving process. Some people say it's linear, some people say it's a cycle. I personally feel it's like an ongoing spiral. It's never ending sometimes, and there's no particular shape. So what do you feel?
I feel like that whole thing which is like, you never get over things. It's just like a circle of grief, and then there's one circle around it, which is your life, and then as you go older, like those concentric circles just go bigger and bigger, and so that grief it stays the same part of you, but you just become more around it. Or that other circle which is like grief is like in a box and there's a pain button, and in the beginning it's just of loss, like it hits the pain button a lot, and then slowly it starts like hitting the pain button less. And so I think it's for me it was very much like all of college was spent in first year Baba passed away, so 2 more years I completed college a year early. So it was just about getting it done, I was just like in that space where raat ko ro lo aur fir subah get that A, because Baba didn't pay this much money for you to not do well and shit. So I think it was very it was and I think one thing is that quite consistently in your life that grief will keep coming up, right? Your dad's not at your graduation, your dad's not at your marriage, if I get married, I don't know. But it's stuff like that. So it was and then you go home and then you go back to Pakistan and then you're like, oh my gosh, that's the street that my daddy used to pick me up on. So that's stuff, but also other kinds of grief, like losing not my friends now. But other kinds of grief, losing friends, becoming these transients of friends as well. I hate borders and I hate laws. But I don't think it ever gets easier. I think if you're caught by grief once,
You're done.
it keeps fulfilling. But it's okay.
Can I actually ask you, just on top of that, there are a couple of questions around that have come on Instagram about your kind of research around grief in general, and because I know you were here in the summer and you kind of did a lot of research with graveyards. And one question is from Chaturi. Chaturi is one of our residents in Sri Lanka. Chaturi Nisansala, also fabulous. Has been looking at memorialization and memorial making in Sri Lanka, which, as we know, I mean, all societies, including Sri Lanka, like Pakistan, are extremely violent and have a lot of autocracy and fascism. But so she was asking you, Tahreen in particular, what are some of the, because she knows of your work, obviously, that the surprising discoveries you found across graveyards in your research. And then Zoya Gul Hassan from Lahore asked, could Tahreen talk about her experiences in graveyard shrines in Karachi? So I feel like you also were motivated to enter these spaces, kind of thinking through the process of grief and kind of how people perform it or kind of show it, or I don't know, in Pakistan memorialize it as well. And I wonder if you kind of just talk about that research process.
So one thing I noticed was in graveyards especially is that hierarchies exist even in death. You know, so people, Christian graves, or like in history graveyard, Christian graves will not even have names on them. Maybe, I don't know if that's a personal preference, but, or they would be like less, like they would not be in the best condition in terms of like a granite grave that you have, right? Or like everybody's like Abba Jan, Pyari Ammi, or like, you know, and so like people, it's interesting how the grave is a representation of the people who lost rather than the people who left, right? And so, and you have these like quotes as well. There's this really incredible quote that is in my print as well, which is like by Rumi, and it was like, separation is only for those who love with their eyes, but for those who love with their soul, there's no such thing as loss. And so there are really interesting ways in which you see hierarchies where like there's a professor who has passed away, and then a baby who has passed away, and then a sibling or anything. There's a Phase 8 graveyard which is really cool. You all should go to it. It's like it's a new graveyard, and it's all like COVID deaths mostly, and it started like last year. Over there, there's like incredible, like people are putting like solar lights on every grave, and they're like putting in green belts, and like there's a genuine form of care in that graveyard. Like I like to be there. And this boy I met there, he comes there every day because his daddy passed away. He comes there every day after school or something because his dad lives in there. And so he's like digging up stuff all the time, and like that stuff, and like you will see an uncle just like reciting things in front of like maybe a spouse or something. Or you will see, you know, like I went with my friend who lost a brother last year. And so, you know, to see that and like be able to speak about his brother or talk about my father in that space. So I think like there are different things in graveyard. But the ways in which we see care is very interesting, in animals, and especially if you notice like in shrines, the ecology of like there will be like trees that like go like jump like this and this and this. It's almost like they're also like bowing down, like so like becoming a part of this infrastructure of the shrine that's constantly growing. So I've always noticed like, okay, how is the nature interacting with the graves? Because that's what it's part of it, right? My dad is just soil now. Like he's in my village, and he's probably like the nutrients that go into the malta that I eat. And that is that weird? Okay. But so you know, it's just like you become part of it, and so the ecology knows him more than I do now. And so the best way to access him is probably through nature or through the primordial source of the universe.
I also just want to say here that, of course, graves, at least in a Pakistani or in a Muslim or in a South Asian context, are incredibly gendered spaces as well, right? I mean, because, suppose, like in Islam, right, there's this hadith or there's a saying, I don't know the exact wording, right, that women were not really allowed or like were discouraged because they would wail or be loud, and also there was supposedly this like practice in pre-kind of Islamic Arabia of like banging pots and kind of making a display, and it's interesting though because like but traditionally, I mean, I don't know, because from what I also understand is that women have always still been going to graves within Islamic societies for generations. Despite that, and it's also shifted, like, you know, over time in different ways, and syncretic practices have kind of melted and moved. And obviously, we also know that like within Saudi Arabia, because within Wahhabi ideology, like graves should not be these kind of display spaces. Everything has been technically erased. Right, so I just think it's also interesting that like you're looking at it again from a perspective of like your positionality in the world, right? Because like I grew up always like going to graveyards, but I never, like my sister never got to experience them as well in the society. And I actually think for a lot of women that is not an experience. Although a lot of people who work in grave sites are women, or actually that's something I've also noticed, it's not really only men, it's a lot of women, and kind of, it's at least in Karachi, in my experience, it's been a lot of Baloch and Sindhi women, especially in the Liari graveyard that or like the Nevasha graveyard that my family is buried in, that it's also interesting because it's also racialized and ethnic, kind of. Again, oral traditions are passed through that, right, because they kind of pass down the caretaking of their graveyards to their family, like their children, basically, things like that.
Yeah, in the village when I go to the grave, it's like, I'm like, who's gonna stop me? Like, the person whose honor I'm supposed to uphold is the dude I'm trying to visit, you know? So it's like, losing a father is also, you lose that patriarchal heritage in a way. It's just like, no, he's my dad and I can access him now. So I've been free. Like, I think a lot of that is because all the stuff I'm doing is because my father has passed away. So in a way, that grief has even freed me. Because I don't have to uphold any man's honor.
So I don't know if you have any comments or anything you jump into.
I mean, I can talk about loss in a more broader sense.
Yeah.
I think there's this really beautiful quote that I found. It's by Adam Phillips. And he wrote that we share our lives with the people we have failed to be. And I think that's a really poignant way of looking at both the past and the future in terms of we are constantly in comparison to alternate pasts and alternate futures, and it is almost human nature to be in conversation with them constantly. And I think there is an element of, particularly in queer feminist discussions, of that alternative utopia, both in past and future. When it comes to past, it could be an imagined utopia of the past that might not have actually existed, but it's idealized in terms of, reinterpreting historical information. Or when it comes to the future, it's a way of, particularly when you have this progressive ideal that society always moves, the arc of history sort of moves in the direction of progress, which again is not always the case, but there is that, and you have people saying, oh, it's 2021, this should be normalized, or it's 2022, why is it still this way? That element of constantly moving in one progressive direction, whatever that means. So just being in conversation with that is also something that's something that we are constantly mourning. That why are we not that? And particularly, as a trans person, for me it is. I don't think I've ever met another trans person who has not told me that they wish they'd transitioned earlier, if they have indeed transitioned. I've definitely felt that myself as well. I was like, I wish I'd done this 10 years earlier, or 20 years earlier, or however long. And there is that imagined past that, oh, what if this had happened? What if I'd made that decision, or my practice had been different? So there is an element of constantly mourning that as well. And of course, the past is in discussion with the future as well, because if you imagine that, say, I had transitioned 10 years earlier, then I'd be in a different place now, and I'd also be in a different place in the future. So it is also a different, if you imagine a different past, that does automatically lead to a different future as well.
In a different present.
And a different present, yeah. And I think when we did the holding space event, I think that was one of the things that we were very conscious of mourning. We weren't just bereaving people who had been killed. We were also mourning those narratives that we are constantly in conversation with that will never materialize. We are mourning the impossible. So I think particularly for trans folks, queer folks, it is a narrative that is often at the front of our mind. And I think that is a loss that is often unacknowledged, because it is one that we really have a complicated relationship with. A lot of the times we sort of succumb into it and collapse into it, saying, oh, I wish it was like this, I wish it was like that, and a lot of the times we want to apologize and say, what good is it to mourn? in actuality, it doesn't really work in those binaries. It's a lot more messy. Sometimes we just have to go through that mess in order to get to a place where, there is an element of self-assuredness. That never feels.
Talking about grief and loss.
Then I come वापस आओ मरने पे मर के दिखा देती हूँ मैं. Yeah, you wanna?
Yeah, it's also 7:10, and I was just thinking it would be super nice, I think, for us to also just kind of be social and hang out, and kind of for you all to have an opportunity to just speak to them one-on-one, see their works. So I don't know if you want to say any last things as well. I can just read out a couple of questions that they don't have to be addressed that I asked. I think they were kind of addressed by you guys in so many ways, but I also wanted to speak to both about community making in your practice, which I think you guys spoke about quite at length, also through activism. And then for Sophia, I was really interested as well in talking about like this idea of working with daily objects and daily materials and kind of the mundane, which you also feel like kind of addressed a bit in the beginning. Not working with any expensive materials, but kind of like what you find and kind of how do you kind of create like spaces or a spectacle or a non-spectacle from the kind of work with the spectacle, non-spectacle idea. But I wonder if people have any last questions or any last thoughts before we kind of just open up space for like this kind of hanging and chatting. Okay, so I'm just gonna do a little performative ending here. I'm gonna just read from what the residents wrote.
You want us to answer those questions?
You can if you want, but I also was just wanting to bring them into the space and just chat with you more. Okay, so I'm just going to read that. So the residency or the kind of open house for this week was titled Pyar Mizahimat Khayal, which I love, and I kind of love that these kind of also came up. And it was written that it is inherently queer and feminist to flatten hierarchy and democratize a space. Since this May, we have been offering collective care, staying with the mundane and the present, rupturing and repairing, unmaking, reconsidering, and thieving. We welcome you to climb down into our space and meet us where we are. So I want to also thank you for kind of climbing down, literally, physically, and meeting us at this point. Just also, there's like a list of events and stuff. There's two posters. You can take one. But there is, just wanted to alert you to some of them. Tomorrow there's a zine making workshop that's totally overbooked, so actually you can't set it. Being led by Tehreem and Sophia-Layla. And because these are totally like a queer feminist kind of mode of circulation, so it's totally appropriate. So thanks for doing that. But then on Wednesday, Aisha Chaudhary is doing a collaborative cloth weaving and reading session called Milna Jilna. Aisha Chaudhary is right, this is Aisha Chaudhary's work. It's also going to be projected live on this thing, on this piece of fabric about the sari that Tehreem was talking about. There's two sessions. We had to cancel the one on Friday, so one's from 4 to 6 and one's from 6 to 8. Please totally come by. There's a Google form to sign up, or you can sign up there or talk to Aisha and make it happen. It's about reading kind of like pieces together, poetry together, writings together about resistance and care, and kind of weaving cloth together and kind of being part of the archive of that. And then on Thursday, which is our closing day, there will be a sharing circle. Is Sehan here? Sehan was here, but I don't know if Sehan left. That Sehan is doing with Arham, Haiji, and Surkhina. They'll be also sharing some of their writings, but you can also bring writings. It will again be like this kind of safe sharing space. It's from 5 to 6:30, and then we're going to end with an artist talk by Aisha Alize, who's right here, whose space this is, and Zahadia Khuzema. Who's there, Zahadia? Zahadia somewhere in the world.
Yeah.
And then we'll also just have food as usual to celebrate kind of just the closing last day. So yeah, please join us for that and spread the word as well. Thanks all for coming, and let's take this. Yeah, we can just chill and chat and do whatever.
Can we put on the video as well?
Yes, we'll also turn on the words.
Everybody want my work?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Okay. Thank you.
But I want to end this video. End. This is the only option. Wait, Sabine, come here. Jaldi aao. What's Sabine here? It's a connection. If I press end, then they will ask me to save, right? Have you ever done this?
Yeah, I can.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.